Parliament. Watch the West Asia Post with me, Radi Francis, only on WION. World is one.
This week on Inside South Asia, India's general election results show a major dip for the ruling BJP. Opposition India bloc emerges as a strong opposition. Maldives to ban Israelis from entering the country over atrocities in the war in Gaza. The grim realities of Hira Mandi in Pakistan's Lahore, a long way from the grandeur of the OTT series of the same name. UNICEF report says tens of thousands of children are worst hit by torrential rains and floods wreaking havoc in many parts of Afghanistan. This and more on Inside South Asia.
Pop star Jennifer Lopez cancels her music tour. We tell you why so many artists are hitting a pause button on their concerts. Decode the weirdest celebrity arrests. And find out some rare facts about Johnny Depp as the actor turns a year older. All this and much more with me, Isha Hanspal, at these times on WION E-Club.
Vielleicht nur als 5%.
Good morning, Asia. Good evening, America. You're watching World DNA with me, Rahisha Sehgal. On the show today, the United Nations has added Israel to its list of blacklist countries that have committed abuses against children in armed conflict. It covers 6 violations, from denying humanitarian access to killing and maiming children. The question being, what kind of practical implications will this have in the ongoing war in Gaza? We'll, of course, be tracking that on World DNA this morning. But first, a quick check on the headlines. Stage set for the swearing-in ceremony of Narendra Modi and his cabinet at New Delhi's iconic Rashtrapati Bhavan on Sunday evening. Massive security in place. Delhi declared a no-fly zone for Sunday and Monday, with heads of state of 5 neighboring countries likely to attend. Israel slams United Nations, adding its military to a global list of offenders who have committed violations against children, terms the decision as shameful and aiding terrorists. Taiwan claims 13 Chinese aircraft, 5 PLA boats and 4 Coast Guard vessels detected around the island. 6 PLA aircraft are said to have violated the median line. Taiwan says its armed forces are monitoring the situation closely. Denmark's Prime Minister attacked on a street in Copenhagen. This is according to her office. The attacker who allegedly hit her has been arrested. US President Joe Biden apologizes to his counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky for delays in military aid to Ukraine. Pledges $225 million in support. Hunter Biden's daughter testifies in defense of her father, saying he seemed great and hopeful when he bought his gun. First week of hearings in the case close. And our top focus will be on right now. The United Nations has added the Israeli military to its global list of offenders that have committed abuses against children in armed conflicts. Well, the list aims to shame parties in conflicts in the hope of pushing them to implement measures to better protect children. Well, Israeli Defense Forces being added to the UN blacklist comes after 8 months of the ongoing war in Gaza, in which more than 15,000 children have been killed. It also comes a day after Israel bombed a UN school in central Gaza, which killed 40 Palestinians, including children. Well, the IDF now joins militant group Hamas and Islamic Jihad that are also on UN's list of shame. The report covers 6 violations, which are killing, maiming, sexual violence, abduction, recruitment and use of children, denial of aid access and attacks of schools and hospitals. However, it is not clear what violations Israel, Hamas or the Palestinian Jihad have been listed for. Well, the list is split into 2. Number 1, parties that have been put in place measures to protect children, and the parties that have not. The latest report is yet to be made public. Israel has lashed out at the report that was compiled by the UN Secretary General's Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict. Meanwhile, Israel's envoy to the UN rejected allegations of immorality in children being killed in the war.
I am utterly shocked and disgusted by this shameful decision of the Secretary General. Courtney, you know that Israel's army is the most moral army in the world. So this immoral decision will only aid the terrorists and reward Hamas. And I have to tell you another thing. The only one who is blacklisted today is the Secretary General, whose decisions since the war started and even before are rewarding terrorists and incentivizing them to use children for terror acts.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that the UN had added itself to the blacklist of history when it joined those who support the Hamas murderers. Echoing similar sentiments, Israel's Foreign Minister Israel Katz said that the decision would have an impact on his country's relations with the United Nations, which are already very strained. The UN has called charges leveled by Israel shocking and unacceptable.
Coming back to this morning's events, earlier today, our Chief of Staff, Courtney Rottray, called the permanent representative of Israel, Gilad Erdan. The call was a courtesy afforded to countries that are newly listed on the annex of the report. It is done to give those countries a heads up and avoid leaks. Ambassador Erdan's video recording of that phone call and the partial release of that recording on Twitter is shocking and unacceptable, and frankly, something I've never seen in my 24 years serving this organization.
Well, another country on this UN blacklist is Russia. The United Nations put Russian forces on its blacklist last year, holding it responsible for the deaths of children and attacking schools and hospitals in Ukraine. And well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Edward P. Joseph from Washington, D.C. Edward is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins University. Thank you so much for taking our time and joining us on World DNA, sir. Now, more than 15,000 children have been killed in Gaza since the war began. Now, this UN list is also known as the list of shame. What kind of practical implications or perhaps consequences will this have in the ongoing war in Gaza?
Well, it remains to be seen whether there will be any practical consequences. This is not the first time, of course, that the United Nations or senior officials within the United Nations have sharply criticized Israel. And the conduct of the war, of course, continues. So it's not really clear what the impact of this listing would be, nor is it clear exactly what the details are, as your report indicated, what the United Nations actually says are the allegations about Israeli conduct. And of course, from the Israeli perspective, you have their viewpoint that it is Hamas that embeds itself with the civilian population that includes children, which then, of course, complicates and raises the question of whether or not there's compliance or lack of compliance with international humanitarian law. So those are all questions that are outstanding. And really, the wider question here is what to do to actually stop the fighting. But we can talk about that shortly. Please.
Right. Mr. Joseph, speak of how the outcome and the implications in the ongoing war remains uncertain. But one thing is certain at this moment is beyond naming and shaming countries, which is one of the basis of this report. What perhaps is the best case scenario to come out of this report?
Well, the best case scenario, and I think there should be universal agreement with this, is to stop the war. That is the best case scenario. But then the irony here is why the United Nations Secretary General doesn't join his voice instead of in this direction of angling yet another criticism to Israel, which, of course, there's already an enormous amount of criticism in various UN bodies. But rather, why doesn't the United Nations Secretary General lend his voice to that of Qatar, of Egypt, of the United States, of the G7, and call on Hamas to accept the ceasefire plan, which includes the permanent cessation of hostilities that Hamas has been demanding all along? And that's really the irony here, why there isn't more focus on that. That report, the details of that, apparently and reportedly, according to President Biden and others, has been accepted by Israel's war cabinet, despite opposition, even with the wider Israeli government. It has been accepted. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not said that he rejects this agreement, and it is now within Hamas's court to accept this. And this is where the focus should be, on ending the fighting, ending the deaths of Palestinian children, of women, and of civilian men. So that's really the irony here, and that's really where the focus should be, is on asking the question of why Hamas does not accept this well put together, detailed agreement that meets their demands. Please.
Right, Mr. Joseph. Of course, the suffering of women and children is at the center of concerns around the world in the ongoing war in Gaza. Let's also talk about Israel's reaction on its listing, on the UN blacklisting. Well, Israel's foreign minister has said that this decision will have an impact on Israel's relations with the UN. Can you tell us more about that, with Netanyahu calling the IDF one of the most moral militaries in the world?
Actually, there's little really of consequence to add here. Israel has very antagonistic relations and has had antagonistic relations with the United Nations for decades, ever since there were some highly questionable resolutions passed decades ago. Israel, of course, is highly critical and highly suspicious of the specialized UN agency, the only one that exists, that is dedicated for a single refugee population, and that is the Palestinian refugee population and UNRWA. So there's nothing really new here. The Israelis do not trust the UN. They reject these calls. And again, the irony here is that the United Nations Secretary General should be pointing and, again, adding his voice. This is not just the United States. This is Qatar and Egypt that have been key mediators and that have said that the Israelis have accepted this agreement to stop the fighting. So that's the agreement. And I call your attention here to the well-known Washington Post columnist, David Ignatius, who asked the question, here's a blunt question, quote, why aren't Palestinians demanding that Hamas's leaders who are hiding in tunnels under the ravaged enclave accept this agreement so that reconstruction can begin? In fact, it's not just a cessation of hostilities. The agreement provides, as columnist David Ignatius points out, who has excellent sources in the U.S. administration, points out that reconstruction would begin immediately. So all of us who are concerned about the suffering Palestinians, instead of being focused on these mutual recriminations between Israel and the United Nations, should be focused on getting Hamas to finally accept this deal that will give the Palestinian population the relief that it desperately needs. Please.
Right, Mr. Joseph, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us here on the show with your insights.
You're welcome.
Now, with a renewed ceasefire push in the 8-month-old Gaza war stalled, Israel bombarded central and southern areas again on Friday, killing at least 28 Palestinians. Well, through Friday, Gaza saw Israeli attacks from land, sea and air. Reports say that the Nusayrat camp in central Gaza was hit again a day after the Israeli strike on the United Nations-run school. Thousands of displaced Palestinians were sheltering at the Al-Sardi school, which is linked to the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees, when it came under attack. The second attack on an UNRWA school in just 2 days. The Israeli raid came after the military announced a new ground and air assault in several refugee camps in central Gaza. In yet another Israeli assault, an air attack on a home in the Sheikh Radwan neighborhood in northern Gaza has killed at least 4 people and injured 14 Palestinians.
We were sitting in our homes and we heard the sound of a missile being fired from a drone. Then another missile hit as it was fired from an F-16 fighter jet. So when we checked, we found women and children in pieces.
A month after rumbling into Rafah in what Israel said was an assault to wipe out Hamas's last combat units, tank-led forces have advanced to the southwest fringes of the city that lie alongside Gaza Strip's border with Egypt. As Israel's offensive continues in the area, many Palestinians in Rafah packed up what was left of their belongings and took down their makeshift tents, forcing them once again to flee the city of Rafah. Meanwhile, on the diplomatic front, top American diplomat Antony Blinken is heading back to West Asia in hopes of going forward with Israel and Hamas militants to accept a ceasefire agreement, which is designed to halt the fighting. Not only that, it also considers releasing hostages and getting more humanitarian aid into the war-torn Gaza Strip. Well, there's some hope for moves to provide much-needed aid into Gaza. The U.S. military-built pier has been reconnected to the beach after it broke apart in storms and rough seas. The U.S. Central Command said that food and other supplies will begin to flow soon into the war-torn territory. In Israel-occupied West Bank, Palestinians clashed with settlers in Burak, a village east of West Bank's Ramallah. Similar clashes erupted simultaneously in the village of Betin, east of the city. Moving on, U.S. President Joe Biden met his Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky in Paris and extended an apology for congressional delays in approving the latest U.S. aid package. Well, the meeting was their first face-to-face encounter since Zelensky visited Washington in December last year. Biden has also announced a fresh $225 million aid on the sidelines of D-Day events. They will meet again next week at a G7 summit in Italy. The group of 7 countries will focus there on using Russian assets frozen after the Ukraine invasion to provide $50 billion for Ukraine. Well, Zelensky thanked Biden for U.S. military and humanitarian support.
Your administration, we are very thankful for all
you continue to fight in a way that is just remarkable, And we're not going to walk away from you. I apologize for those weeks of not knowing what's going to happen in terms of funding. Today, I'm also signing an additional package for $225 million to help you reconstruct the electric grid. But once we got the national security bill passed, that was a political issue. We were able to get it all done.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. First of all, thank you so much for your significant support. Your administration. We are very thankful from all Ukrainians to your military support, financial support, humanitarian one. We think that we will have more than 100 countries, and I hope that it will be a first step on this way to peace. We need peace in Ukraine, but we will stay. Anyway, stay strong. And of course, I want to discuss some future events. Thank you again.
Well, as the first week of Hunter Biden's federal gun trial rounds up, his daughter, Naomi Biden, took the witness stand for the defense on Friday. Hunter Biden faces criminal charges over lying on a federal form about his drug use so that he could unlawfully get a gun. The defense called Hunter's daughter to the witness stand, where she said she did not see her father use drugs at any point in 2018 and that he was living with a sober coach late that year. In addition to that, she testified her father appeared in good health and was responding well to the drug treatment around the time he bought the handgun, that is. While giving the testimony, she told the jury that she saw her father in California, where he seemed really great, in quotes, but on cross-examination, Naomi Biden was shown that she had been messaging and calling her father as she was unable to reach him for hours. Well, the week's proceedings have been largely dedicated to highlighting the seriousness of Hunter Biden's drug problem through highly personal testimony. Jurors heard testimonies from Hunter Biden's ex-wife, former girlfriend, and sister-in-law, who testified about his habitual crack use and their failed efforts to help him get clean. Hunter Biden, who has pleaded not guilty, says the Justice Department is bending to the political pressure from Republicans and that he is being unfairly targeted. U.S. President Joe Biden has said that he would not pardon his son if he's found guilty of criminal federal gun charges. He also affirmed that he would accept the outcome of the trial. And on to the world of sports. World number 3, Carlos Alcaraz, has fought his way into the French Open men's singles final. The Spaniard defeated soon-to-be world number 1, Yannick Sinner, in a 5-set thriller to reach his first title clash in Paris. Alcaraz made it to the semi. And with that, we call to wrap. Thanks very much for staying with us. You're watching WION World is One. Do stay tuned.